안녕하십니까. Rupert, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. 아, 지금부터 기조 강연 키노트 스피커로 와주신 루퍼트 교수님의 이제 기조 강연을 듣고 또 박구영 교수님의 토론을 이어서 들으면서 여러분들이 지금 이 내용 안에서 드시는 궁금증 그리고 미리 읽어 오신 분들도 계실 텐데요. 전적으로 여기 자료집에 준해서 또 새롭게 또 구성하신 프리젠테이션으로 함께 해주실 겁니다. 그래서 질문 있으시면 마지막에 이제 Q&A 시간 있으니까 자유롭게 같이 참여해 주시면 좋겠습니다. This presentation and discussion will be supported by both an AI simultaneous interpretation function and professional interpreters Teholi to ensure smooth communication. So we kindly ask both Korean and English speaking participants to feel comfortable joining the Q&A session after the presentations. 네, 그러면 now I'm speaking in Korean from now on. 루퍼트 교수님을 소개하겠습니다. 루퍼트 교수님께서는 캠브리지 대학교의 교육학과 교수로 재직 중이시고 캠브리지 휴즈홀에 위치한 디지털 교육 미래 이니셔티브의 설립자이자 학술 책임자이십니다. 교육이론, 교육심리학, 기술 기반 교육 분야에서 영향력 있는 다수의 서적과 논문을 저술해 오셨고 지금도 신간을 출판을 이제 하실 예정이시고 또 저희에게 소개해 주러 또 자료를 보내주셔서 저희 자료집에서도 신간을 확인하실 수 있습니다. 교수님의 연구는 디지털 시대의 기술 기반 교육, 특히 기술이 지원하는 대화적 교육의 이론과 실제에 초점을 두고 있습니다. 그래서 오늘 발표에서 우리가 고민하고 있는 AI 시대의 미술 교육에 대해 철학적으로 그리고 또 문학적으로 깊이 있는 연구를 함께 나누어 주시겠습니다. 예, 그러면 루퍼트 교수님을 박수로 맞이해 주십시오. Okay, Rupert, we are ready. Thank you.
Oh, great. Shall I kick off then? Lovely to see you all. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to talk about art education. My main work so far has been on dialogic education, mostly in the context of talk in classrooms, in getting children to talk. But my main inspiration was always the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty from France, whose approach, I think, is the essence of dialogic, provides the foundations for my dialogic education theory. And Maurice Merleau-Ponty was a philosopher very much interested in art. So I'm taking this opportunity to outline his theory of art and to combine that with my dialogic education theory to provide a dialogic theory of art education that's particularly relevant to the age of AI and the use of AI. I'll start by sharing my screen. I hope you can see the screen now.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I think I've started too late, too further on. Let's go back to the beginning. So Merleau-Ponty put forward this philosophy of the chiasm, which he referred to as a new ontology. An ontology, of course, is about the nature of being and how we understand being. And he was seeking to understand being as a relationship between the inside and the outside, the sentient and the sense, the flesh of the body and the flesh of the world, as he called it. Following from this, we can understand education as not, some people think it's the transmission of knowledge or facts. It's not that, simply. Well, of course, that's part of it. Other people focus on the creativity of students and say it's about focusing on the child and the child's becoming creative. And of course, it's also that, but not completely, because you can't be creative in a vacuum. The idea of education that follows from Merleau-Ponty's chiasm ontology is what I call dialogic education. To be dialogic, to be in dialogue, is always to be on both sides. And one part of this education, from an art point of view, is drawing students into a dialogue with the world. So it's not just them being creative in a vacuum. It's not just them learning facts. It's about engaging in a responsive and dynamic dialogue. The problem that I encountered through my education in the UK, but that I also see for many young people here and around the world, is that education often leaves young people lost in the unreality of abstract ideas that someone has taught them that they believe without really understanding. So they become lost in cliches. The idea of a cliche is of a meaning that was spontaneous once. It once meant something, but now it's lost its life, its energy. It's become a bit dead, distant from reality. I'll explore this idea later. I think that this problem, which in a way is a problem of meaning. Meaning, of course, is a complex concept, but let's simplify it. Why do people want to get out of bed in the morning? Why do they want to live their lives? Where is the energy? And sometimes that's lacking for young people. There's not much sense of purpose or joy. And I think that this lack of meaning can sometimes be caused by education. The education system that we've inherited has only been around, I think, a couple of hundred years. A global mass education system of the kind we see in the UK and in Korea. It's very much based on the technology of print. And of course this has had wonderful affordances and has created the modern world. But at the same time, I think it has some cognitive, experiential limitations. On the whole, a print-based approach, and this is not something I can explain now, but I've developed it in different books and sources, tends not to see the world as something we relate to and engage with, but more as something we represent. You can represent meanings in books, in the library, you can transfer them into the brains of students and examine these representations in tests and so on. I'm speaking from Cambridge University, and here people often refer to their subjects in terms of what they are reading. If you say, what are you studying? And they'll say, oh, I'm reading maths or I'm reading sociology. Because the curriculum can be represented as a stack of books. And of course that's, has its strengths, but also there's a danger. The danger is that people become lost in somebody else's meanings that don't really mean very much to them. So I see this new technology, generative artificial intelligence, as an opportunity. Generative artificial intelligence, for me, is very much based on the internet. It's an enhancement of the internet. it wouldn't be possible unless they could trawl billions of data points on the internet in order to train artificial intelligences on everything, potentially everything, on large amounts of things that have been said or written or produced in other ways on the internet. So this seems to me to be our new dominant cognitive technology. It's just started, but it's changing the way in which we think and in how we do education. And while of course that has many dangers, it also has opportunities. So what I'm going to ask the question in this talk, and hopefully, of course, please ask questions so we have some time for discussion. Is this an opportunity for us to rethink education in a way that can restore the power of meaning that many feel has been lost by the print-based education? Merleau-Ponty I find very exciting as a philosopher of perception, but also of art, because he points out that everything in a sense comes from the touch. Perception, of course, is seeing, it's hearing, but it's also touching the world. He calls this point of touch the écart. Imagine, hold your thumb and finger together and feel that point. Are you touching or are you being touched? Merleau-Ponty would say that you're on both sides together. That every time you touch the table, you can also feel the table touching you. So although we often imagine ourselves as being contained within a world, that world of space and time that we've constructed has been built out of multiple touches over time. And when you think about it, where is the space of that touch? Try and focus on it. I believe this opens onto a more primordial space, a semiotic space, a space of meaning. And real art arises in that space, which is a space logically prior to the world of space and time that we've constructed. So this way of thinking about reality from Merleau-Ponty helps us also to understand our appreciation of art forms. We look at a beautiful rock, for example. We don't just stand outside it. We don't just represent it. As Merleau-Ponty said, the world, he called it the ensemble of my body's roots. To understand the world, we incarnate it with our body. When you see the rock, you in a sense become the rock, because you're always on both sides of the écart, of the experience of touching the world and being touched by the world. You generate a sense of your body on one side and of the world on the other, but really, where are you? You are in the middle, and this is the dialogic relationship. In a dialogue, you're on both sides at once, which in a sense means you're in the middle between the self and the world. This écart is an opening of a space of possibility. Inhabiting that space, we are not simply a body, we are not simply the world, we are the potential to create these different images. So when you see a sculpture like this is the Angel of the North, a famous sculpture in the UK, as a child and, as a naive adult, just accepting the experience, you become the sculpture. You experience your body changing. Technology, of course, can expand and transform this experience. Merleau-Ponty was doing a phenomenology of perception. How does it feel? Let's explore the experience of seeing, of tasting, of touching. And he gave the example of a blind man. Now imagine if you close your eyes and all you have is a stick to touch the world. That stick also touches the world, and you create different spaces through that touching, through that exploration with the stick. And this is a general model of how technology can extend and transform our reality. I gave the example in the paper that comes with this talk of how using virtual reality in a haptic glove could enable you, for example, to experience the ringing of an ancient Korean bell that no longer exists. It's very interesting to think about, if you imagine this experience, put on the 3D goggles and the haptic glove, and you experience sounds and feelings, vibrations. Where exactly is that experience? Where is that art coming from? Previously, we've always imagined that technology reflects real physical events. So for example, if you record the music of the bell, there was an original bell, there was a real physical bell, and then you have the CD or the recording. But now, especially with AI, you can generate music, you can generate art, you can generate events that were never in external space and time. They exist in this primordial semiotic space, a kind of design space. This is the space before space and time, before we sense ourselves as having a body, before we create a world. This is the original space of the Big Bang, the space of the universe. And through art, we can return to that design space, space of meaning. I'll say more about this in exploring what art is. But first I'll define the chiasm. It's basically the idea that, like the écart, the ultimate unit of meaning is a figure on a ground. So the ground, the outside, comes in to define the figure, but the figure also defines the ground. It's the ground of this figure, the figure of this ground. And there's a dialogic relationship there. It's not just mechanical. There's a tension. In grammar or rhetoric, if you reverse the subject and object, if you say, I touch the world touches me, that's a chiasm. And it's from this that Merleau-Ponty draws the idea. It's a mutual envelopment, as he calls it. So it's essentially a dialogic concept. To give an example of why this might be relevant to arts, obviously relevant to art, but an example that inspired me because it so much reflects this body world chiasm that Merleau-Ponty is talking about, is a dancer called Moon Ribas, who installed in her feet sensors that could reflect seismic activity on the planet Earth. So with a seismograph, you have reflections of earthquakes and so on. Whenever an earthquake or a mini tremor occurred, she would feel it in her feet, and she would do a dance based on this feeling. Here she is explaining it. Hopefully this will come up for you. Oh. Let's see if I can. Oh, doesn't seem to be working. Let me try again. well, I'm sorry, it should connect to the internet. I'm not quite sure why it's not doing that. But it's just, as I explained, she explains how she is connected then to the planet Earth, and her performances, which are very beautiful, reflect that and respond to what's happening on the planet. And I just think that's an exciting way how we can see that this technology can illustrate, exemplify this body-world chiasm, whereby there's a reversibility between your world and yourself. And the reality of experience, if you look at your experience, it's never really on this side. It's never really on that side. It's always in between, in the tension in between. But of course, not everybody has that rich experience of the world. Frequently there's this feeling that the world is dead, enclosed, finished, boring. I use in the paper an example from the Romantic poet, the so-called Romantic. He wasn't really, he was a very unique, mystical poet, William Blake from England, who begins his famous collection, Songs of Innocence, which are followed by Songs of Experience, with a song about how he was asked by a child on a cloud to write down his songs, to share them with people. But in writing them down, he created a pen, and he uses this special word. In order to write, he stained the water clear. And of course, staining is not a negative thing. It's like polluting. And I think he's suggesting there the origin of the alienated world, the closed down world, the world which feels as if it has no meaning. He illustrated this in a famous picture of Newton, Isaac Newton. And he was, if you look at this picture, it's where Isaac Newton is defining the world. And of course, Blake was somewhat critical of this new modern rationalist approach. And what he illustrated in this picture, which I think is kind of interesting, is how the infinite richness of experience can be turned into an abstracted representation. So look at the quality and the picture of the rock. And if you go into detail, of course, you see the paint and the everything is, in a sense, fractal. It's complex all the way down. But this compares to the simplicity of Newton's representations. On the one hand, you get this almost infinitely rich representation. On the other, you get this very simplified diagram. And this, what Blake claims, is what was happening in education to some extent. Instead of opening up the mind, it was being closed down. Merleau-Ponty explains that meaning comes from the perceptual world. And the perceptual world isn't a world, as we've explained, it's not a world already within pre-packaged space and time. It's a world of experiences that go beyond that world, that belong to the primordiality of the semiotic space from which perceptions emerge. It refers to that primordial property that belongs to the flesh. He calls this unity of body and world the flesh, of being here and now, of radiating everywhere and forever, being an individual, of being also a dimension and a universal. If we actually attend to any experience whatsoever, you can see what Merleau-Ponty means. Any experience whatsoever can be a metaphor that goes beyond that location, So if you have an experience, for instance, now, in this moment, that moment makes no sense unless it's in contrast to an eternity of time. If we say it's now, I don't know where now is. Is now in my room, in the basement in Cambridge, or is now in your space in Korea? Is the here in this room, or is the here there? But to have a here implies to have a there, to have a larger world. So it's actually not possible to have an experience that isn't also everywhere and forever. The everywhere and forever is implicit in the experience. And that is why art is possible. That's why we can take a single word, a single experience, a single sound, and give it meaning that is beyond, that transfers to other spaces and times. At least that's what Merleau-Ponty is claiming. And that's why art can potentially be so important. Merleau-Ponty described a very new technology at his time, a slow motion film of Matisse painting, the famous French artist Matisse. And in the video, you can see how Matisse steps back from the whole painting, contemplates it, how his brush dances around, and then suddenly it dabs in. And he makes just the right intervention. And I think Merleau-Ponty's point was that in this process, you could see the chiasm, the movement between the figure and the ground, seeing the whole of the painting and then changing a little figure. And each time you'd make a line or a dot, the whole energy of the canvas changes. So this process oscillating between figure and ground was, of course, also a way of reflecting his insights that he was transmitting to the whole world. The canvas becomes like a model for the world in that process. This is also what Paul Klee described in his notebooks about painting. He's saying how you take a blank canvas and every step, every point, every color radiates within the frame of the canvas in relation to the other points. So the source of meaning in art is not substance, it's the differences between lines, between points, between colors. Implicitly, you have a potential whole of meaning, which is being divided, which is being separated, which is being carved into particular experiences, which then, of course, resonate, picked up by others through the pattern. Interestingly, that's very much how AI is working, isn't it? It's finding patterns. So you can translate now, I hope the translation's working, between very different contexts in England and Korea, because similar patterns are universal, because these originate in the first design space, the semiotic space that art has access to. So the point of art education might not be getting students to create pictures, although I'm sure that's very valuable. It might be more changing everybody's capacity to experience. I think this is the message of Marcel Duchamp's famous challenge to the art world. When he took a simple urinal from a hardware store and he signed it Armut, and he tried to put it in an art exhibition, a sculpture exhibition. Eventually they accepted it, I think. There was some controversy. But maybe that's just a joke. But it's also, if you look at that urinal, the porcelain, the shape, now that it's been called fountain, we call it fountain. If you think of it as an artwork, perhaps you experience it differently. Perhaps you see the shape, the textures differently. Illustrating how our very perceptions of reality can be transformed through art education such that each moment can be welcomed creatively, can be seen not just contained within a box created by our purposes, our instrumental frame, but can radiate outwards as a metaphor, illustrating more universal patterns, bringing the world more to life. This is also a theme that emerges, for me, very strongly in poetry. I particularly love the work of the American English poet T.S. Eliot. And in his poem, The Four Quartets, he quotes words from the French poet Stéphane Mallarmé to say that the purpose of poetry is to purify the language of the tribe. He describes poetry as trying to recover from cliches, trying to recover what has been lost, the fresh and original meaning. Mallarmé himself, in his original style of writing, refers to the idea that the meaning of the word is not in the words, but in the space between the words. In other words, the idea is that poetry is not just trying to communicate a fixed meaning, but is trying to draw people into the experience of the space between words, which is the infinite potential for meaning that each moment has. So it's a recovery of freshness and originality, newness. So I briefly outlined Merleau-Ponty's theory of perception, which is also a theory of art. His claim, of course, is that art is trying to restore that original power of meaning that is there in every experience. And I want to relate this to dialogic education. And one way to understand dialogic education, I've taken from Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, a book by James Joyce, which describes really how he became an artist. And the book starts with his experience as a child, hearing words coming down to him as he lay in his cot. But then in the book, he gradually learns, goes to school, he learns everything about Ireland. He becomes more and more articulate and capable of constructing ideas. And in the last lines, he leaves Ireland in order to go and write. He becomes an artist. This is a fascinating account of what we could call internalization. This is what Vygotsky describes as how education works. You start off with a social world of words and cognitive tools, and gradually you internalize them. But in that internalization process, there's a transformation. Things that were encountered outside you, like the words that didn't mean anything when you first heard them, they become like lights for your understanding. They transform as they go inwards. In his famous quote from his book, Thinking and Language, Vygotsky points out that consciousness is reflected in the word, like the sun in a droplet of water. The meaningful word is a microcosm of the whole of human consciousness, of everything that we're aware of. I think we can, in my recent book, Theory of Rethinking Educational Theory, it's my last book, I begin with the example of the Mobius strip. Here's an illustration from the artist Escher. The significance of the Mobius strip is as the ant walks along it, he's on the outside, but if he keeps walking, he ends up on the inside. And education is like that. Things that first appear outside us. Let's take the example of this Greek word, which at first when I encountered it, logos, in philosophy texts, I didn't know what it meant. People actually used the original Greek and that meant nothing to me. So it's just an object outside in the world. But gradually as I read more, as I thought more, this concept of logos, of reason, the word, and this is what Vygotsky is referring to when he says the word. He's referring to this ancient Greek concept, logos, logic, reason. It starts outside you, it's something you encounter and don't understand. Through education, you internalize it, and it takes on meaning. It becomes like a light which you can see the world with, a way of thinking the world. And this is actually what dialogic education has always been about, empowering people to name the world. This is what Freire refers to, the famous Brazilian educator who was the first to refer to dialogic education. He contrasts what he calls banking education, whereby basically the ideas of the rich and powerful are given to children as if they're deposited in a bank and the children have to reproduce them in exams. This is a way of constraining thought, not of liberating. And his dialogic education works with the lives of the people he was educating. It was about adult education. He was working with illiterates in Brazil and finding the words that were important for them and enabling them to name the world, as he put it. So it's that transformation. It's not about imposing other people's understanding. It's about empowering people to be able to create. So that's the essence of dialogic education. It's about this transformation from the outside to the inside, to enable people to think, to be creative in their own lives. It sounds exciting. I'll just illustrate it again with this little example from science. First, in science education, first you encounter things like black holes or rockets or engines. They're a long way away, they're out there, you don't understand them. Through drawing them into dialogue with each other, you bring them into relationship with each other, but that's not a fixed relationship. That means you know how to explain them to people, how to criticize them. You see where they fit in the long-term dialogue of science. So I argue you're moving them into an expanding dialogic space. So a black hole, before anyone knew about them, they didn't exist in the dialogue. They weren't there, but now they become a metaphor to help us understand everything. So every new thing that comes in to the dialogue of science expands and enriches the dialogic space. So that's that model of dialogic education. But there's a problem with it, because we're always starting with already understood and used words and cliches. By focusing on language, by focusing on the word, there's a threat that we might simply be indoctrinating children into a pre-existing box-like reality. And that's where I think art education has such a powerful role, because as we've seen from Merleau-Ponty's theory of art has the potential to reach beyond the words, to the actual experiences in their depth that precede and exceed language. To illustrate this, Merleau-Ponty sometimes quotes from the French writer Marcel Proust, who describes how his hero, his protagonist, Mr. Swan, is sitting in a concert by a composer called Von Tye, and he hears a little phrase, a phrase of music, La Petite Phrase, and he's overwhelmed by it. So it's not just something that he listens to externally, it enters him as if from within, and he finds himself crying. And he realizes that the music somehow sums up the essence of his failed love for a woman called Odette. But more than that, is somehow the essence of love. And what's so interesting about this deep description of this experience of music is that it's clear that this sign, music is a kind of sign, a technology. It's not something that he possesses, that he controls. It's something that possesses him. The signs possess us before we possess them, as Merleau-Ponty puts it. When I Googled La Petite Phrase, I came up immediately with a Korean ensemble playing it. Unfortunately, I don't seem to be able to play this in this mode. Let's see if I can do that. Oh. Yeah, listen for a second and see.
Unfortunately, we cannot listen the music.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that's a
Sorry.
shame.
I will put the link again after that.
Well, my idea was, if you enter into that experience of music, you'll realize, hopefully, following Merleau-Ponty, following Proust, that this music is reaching you from beyond, can potentially reach you from beyond your conscious verbal constructs. So it's going beyond language in a way that connects us to this rich, primordial, perceptual ground. So now, how does AI relate to this? Well, I'm not sure. This is experimental, this is new. But AI has fascinating potential. The danger is, of course, that the AI, if people listen to it and take it seriously and treat it as the authority, it is a very effective way of containing students in the box of convention and of cliché. But it can also be used in ways that potentially liberate people by drawing their attention to that gap of meaning, that interface between the body and the world, the sentient and the sense that we mentioned at the beginning with this concept of the écart. One example, well, this is a way in which we can use AI in music. It was an illustration from a virtual reality and technology used by the English artist Ghislaine Boddington in installations that I have participated in, where you found in a room people moving together change the environment. They change the light and the music that's going on around them. And so they discover gradually that the patterns they make as a collective can be creative and can be more harmonious or more disruptive. So it's an experience of, in a sense, that collective dialogic space, but amplifying and drawing attention to the way in which the body shapes the world and the world shapes the body, because your movements are reflected in light, sounds around you. And there are quite a few ways of using AI like that. At the MIT Media Lab, for example, there are similar adventures and illustrations of how moving mobile phones in space can produce different sounds and so on. So that's one way in which AI can be brought into art education to illustrate and draw attention to this reversibility, this chiasm between body and world. When researching this and looking at AI in education, I came across quite a few uses, including this article from Korea, where they're using AI as a conversation partner with students to increase their appreciation of art and to draw their attention. There, of course, is a danger here that it's restoring the cliches. What's so important about the use of AI in education generally is that we don't use it in a way that encourages students to take it seriously, but we use it to prompt them to think. Metacognitive prompts, challenging them, questioning them. Here, you can see the AIs questioning them about their experience. What did you see? What did you feel? What did it mean to you? And I think that's potentially a good way of using AI in art education to draw people into that gap, the Eckhart, the experience of reality before conventions enclose. So just to summarize what I've been trying to say, I've always been promoting dialogic education. And dialogic education is about drawing students into a dialogue with the world. But frequently, the world that's referred to is the cultural world, the world of language, about how concepts and words that are out there become internalized slowly through education, so that students become a voice in the collective dialogue. The danger there, of course, is that words and language are already pre-structured, pre-understood, that you could simply be inducting students into a position of uncreativity, where they find themselves enclosed in a box of assumptions, cut off from the real world. So the great potential of art education, if done dialogically, is that it is the internalization not only of language and words, but of the most primordial stuff of experience, of the original potential for meaning found in the gap between body and world, between signs, between different voices in dialogue. And that internalization is a full education where you don't just end up as an articulate voice, knowing a language, but you are also a creative person, able to meet each moment of experience creatively, being the author of your life, not an isolated author, but in dialogue with the whole cosmos, with the whole world around you. So the potential of dialogic art education with AI is about equipping students to become co-creators of meaning with others, with the culture, with technology, but also with the world. So I'll stop there, and here's some links and references. These ideas are reflected more deeply in my book, Rethinking Education Theory, Education as Expanding Dialogue, which came out earlier this year. So thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity to articulate my ideas about art education. I hope it was useful.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, Professor Rigeri. By sharing insights centered on Merleau-Ponty's concept of chiasm, you reminded us that we must move beyond conventional education to rediscover its original vitality. Your talk gave us much to reflect on regarding the nature of dialogic education. Thank you so much. 지금 나누어 주신 내용은 위게르프 교수님께서 미술교육 분야와 함께 같이 더 나아가시기 위해서 이번 발표를 위해서 연구하신 내용들입니다. 그래서 지금 같이 들으시면서 생각하신 것들, 우리 토론자로 와주신 박효영 교수님께서 깊이 있는 토론문과 함께 더 저희의 이해를 더해 주실 텐데요. 박효영 교수님께서는 태호 선생님 지금부터 잠시만요. 박규현 교수님은 전북대학교의 그 교육학 교수님이시면서 저희의 이 토론문을 작성해 주시기 위해서 함께 많은 공부를 해주셨습니다. 그래서 박수와 함께 박규현 교수님 맞이해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 통역사님 방금 얘기를 그냥 짧게 위계리프 교수님께 전달 부탁드립니다.
Thank you for such an insightful presentation. We're going to proceed with the discussion panel session, and we have Professor Hyung Park from Jeonbuk National University. If there is anything you'd like to know prior to proceeding with the session, or any questions that you have, it would be great if you could put forward any questions you have right now. Thank you.
Well, will there be questions for me to answer, or?
Oh, yes, after this there would be a Q&A session.
Okay. Well, I'll wait.
Thank you.
예, 안녕하세요. 오늘 이렇게 귀중한 학회 시간에 토론을 맡게 돼서 영광으로 생각합니다. 특히 저명하신 위게리프 교수님의 오늘 굉장히 저도 많이 배웠고 통찰력 있는 내용에 제가 토론을 하게 돼서 영광으로 생각합니다. 준비된 토론문을 빠르게 읽으면서 진행하겠습니다. 저에게 주어진 시간이 15분인데요. 너무 빠르게 읽으면 아마 번역이 조금 영어 번역이 어려울 것 같아서 좀 적당한 속도로 읽겠습니다. 들어가는 말, 메를로퐁티의 카이아즘과 AI 시대의 미술교육. 두 대상이 서로 침투하며 얽히고 하나로 뒤섞이는 관계를 설명하는 메를로퐁티의 카이아즘 개념은 포스트 휴머니즘의 시대에 정신 물질의 이원론을 거부하는 신물질주의의 세계관에 잘 부합하는 관점으로 여겨집니다. 오랜 동안 주체와 대상, 인식자와 인식의 대상을 구별하였던 근대성의 관념은 인간과 자연, 이성과 감성, 그리고 암과 삶의 분리함과 동시에 이성을 인간성의 핵심으로 간주하면서 교육을 편향되게 만들어 왔습니다. 이는 예술 교육에 있어서도 마찬가지인 것 같습니다. 그러한 점에서 육체에 대한 멜로퐁티의 현상학은 인간은 정신적 존재이기 전에 자연 생태계의 이론이며 세상 만물의 존재성과 직간접적으로 얽혀있는 존재일 수밖에 없음을 강조하고 있습니다. 이는 감각과 감각된 것 사이의 간극이 아닌 가역성과 상호 포섭의 관계에 대한 오늘 위게리프 교수님의 강연에서도 잘 드러나고 있습니다. 본 강연은 이러한 멜로퐁티의 카이아즘의 개념이 AI 시대를 위한 변증법적 혹은 대화적 미술교육의 성격을 잘 드러내고 있음을 우리에게 잘 알려진 예술가나 그 작품들을 소개하면서 아주 설득력 있고 재미있게 설명해주고 있습니다. 자, 본문입니다. 미술교육, 인간과 AI의 카이아즘. 교육은 카이아즘의 가역성을 실현하며 주변과 지속적인 대화에 참여하는 창조적인 자아를 목표로 하는 것 같습니다. 특히 예술교육의 주요 목적은 상수적 표현이나 기교를 훈련시키는 것이 아니라 사물의 원초적 은유성에 접근하고 새로운 경험의 세계를 창조하도록 지원, 인용입니다. 하는 것이라는 주장에 동의합니다. 예를 들어서 조소 및 조형 작업은 사물의 특성을 감각적으로 느끼고 그 사물들이 자연환경 속에서 확정하거나 공존하는 방식을 배우며 조각의 행위나 감각을 통해 세계 속에 존재하는 인간의 신체성을 느끼는 기회가 된다는 오늘 강연 내용에 공감을 불러오고 있습니다. 이 포스트 휴머니즘의 여러 이론들을 통해 잘 알려진 바 있듯이 인간은 자연을 직접적으로 접촉하고 경험하기보다는 기술과 도구 혹은 매체를 통해 경험하고 자연 만물과 공존하면서 지나왔습니다. 무용과 무용수는 구별할 수 없다는 말처럼 오늘 강연에서 소개된 사례인 지진 센서는 인간의 발과 생태적 지구를 연결하는 중요한 매개체로 이해할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그런 의미에서 미술 혹은 예술 교육은 인간과 세계의 연결성에 대한 교육일 것입니다. 3. 예술은 경험의 원초성을 회복하는 역할을 한다는 말에도 공감합니다. 근대성은 이런 원초적 경험의 기회를 이성과 언어의 장막 속에 가두어 버렸습니다. 왜곡된 인간 중심주의, 즉 이성 편향적 세계관에 매몰된 채 세상과 직접적으로 피부로 만나서 어우러지고 뒤섞여야만 하는 인간의 본성을 가려왔습니다. 근대성이 가려왔죠. 테크노로서 예술은 인간과 세계를 매개하는 가장 본질적인 통로이므로 예술을 통해 인간은 세상 속의 존재임을 깨닫는 경험을 할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 다행히도 위기리프 교수님이 언급하신 바와 같이 오늘날 MZ세대 혹은 새로운 세대들은 인용된 도구, 상징, 기술적 수단과 같은 매개물로 가득한 세상과 소통할 수 있는 잠재력을 아직 잃지 않고 있는 것 같습니다. 그런 의미에서 교육으로서 예술은 이러한 사물들의 원초적 목소리를 회복하고 그것에 귀를 기울이는 훈련을 하는 것이라고 보여집니다. 그런 의미에서 예술과 기술은 원래 한 몸이었고 오늘날 기술의 총화인 AI의 등장은 그러한 원초성으로 회복할 수 있는 기회를 주고 있는 게 아닌가라는 생각이 듭니다. 다섯 번째, 기술 진화론의 관점에 따르면 AI는 인간이 발명한 것이 아니라 세상의 물질적 진화의 산물이다라고 얘기합니다. AI를 인간의 발명품으로 생각하는 것은 그런 생각조차 인간 이성 중심주의에 기이한 것이라는 지적이 있습니다. AI 기술은 인간성을 파괴하는 것이 아니라 인간성의 본질을 되돌아보고 생태, 인간 사물의 상호 연결성을 회복할 수 있는 기회가 될 수 있을 것 같습니다. 여섯 번째, 예술의 창의성이 내면화와 변혁으로서 교육을 통해 이루어진다는 말에도 동의합니다. 인용된 비고츠키가 교육을 인간 의식의 미시 세계에서 이루어지는 안과 밖을 뒤집어 놓는 작업이라고 했을 때 그 과정에서 문화와 언어의 역할이 중요했다고 우리가 알고 있습니다. 하지만 21세기 인공지능 시대에는 그러한 창의성의 동력을 언어와 문화에만 찾을 필요는 없을 것 같습니다. 오늘 강연에서도 위게리프 박사님이 언급하였듯이 다양식적인 것을 보여주는 AI 기술은 세상의 모든 감각과 양식성을 통한 인간과 세계의 소통을 가능하게 하고 있습니다. 즉 이성이 창의성의 원천이 아니라 신체성, 감각성을 포함한 다양식성이 창의성의 원천이 되고 있는 것 같습니다. 일곱 번째, 생성형 AI 등장은 인간만의 주체성, 자율성, 능동성을 가진 존재라는 관념에도 도전을 가져다 주고 있습니다. 논란은 있지만 AI도 창의성의 주체가 될 수 있다는 주장이 있습니다. 다만 인간의 의미와 역할을 견지하고 지속 불가능성을 갖는 미래에 대비하기 위해서는 창의성과 인류의 미래를 AI에게만 의존하는 것은 리스크가 따를 것입니다. 그런 의미에서 최근에는 인간 AI의 창의적 협력에 기반한 확장된 창의성의 개념이 활발히 연구되고 있습니다. 자, 마지막 나가는 말로 오늘 강연의 핵심적인 주장들을 한번 정리해 보겠습니다. 위게리프 교수님은 인간과 AI의 공존 그리고 AI 활용 교육에 대한 매우 의미 있는 관점들을 제시해 주었습니다. 세 가지를 요약하면 AI 시대의 미술 교육에서 교사는 AI의 도움으로 학생들이 반성적이고 창의적인 목소리를 낼 수 있도록 돕는데 교사는 더욱 집중할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 두 번째, 대화적 미술 교육을 위해서 AI 기술은 세상을 수동적으로 수용하는 것이 아니라 적극적으로 조형해 나가기 위한 매개체이자 통로 혹은 수단이 될 수 있습니다. 세 번째, AI 기술은 언어 너머의 공간으로 이끌어주고 세상을 날 것 그대로 경험하고 세상과 어우러지도록 하는데 도움이 된다. 즉 AI를 인간을 대체하는 것이 아니라 확장시키는 도구로 활용할 수 있다라는 그런 주장에 매우 공감하고 있습니다. 자, 마무리하자면 오늘 강연의 요지처럼 AI 기술의 등장은 인간 이성 중심주의와 언어 중심주의의 장벽을 허물고 인간과 자연의 혼용성과 상호 연결성을 회복할 수 있는 기회가 될 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그에 따라 AI 시대 미술 교육의 방향은 우리 학생들이 온몸으로 세상을 인식하고 표현하며 거대한 지구 생태적 네트워크의 일원으로 참여하게 도울 수 있는 귀중한 기회가 될 수 있을 것이라고 생각합니다. 오늘 굉장히 의미 있고 시의적절한 강연과 놀라운 통찰력을 보여주신 위게리프 교수님께 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 이상입니다.
박효영 교수님 감사합니다. 통역님 지금부터 순차 통역으로 부탁드리겠습니다. 루퍼트 위게리프 교수님께서 토론문에 대해서 혹시 추가로 먼저 해주실 이야기가 있으시다면 먼저 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다.
더 추가할 사항은 없습니다. 앞으로 더 많은 분들의 질의응답을 지금 기대를 하고 있습니다.
네,
But
감사합니다.
thank you very much for the discussion, very insightful and valuable discussion. So thanks to the professor.
그리고 토론문을 정말 잘 읽었고 정말 감사하다는 말씀을 전하고 싶습니다.
네, 정말 감사합니다. 지금 저희 현장에도 많은 분들이 계시고 온라인으로도 또 많이 들어와서 함께 이 내용을 듣고 같이 이제 그 생각을 나누어 주시기 위해서 준비하고 계시는데요. 혹시 현장에 있는 분들의 질문을 먼저 받겠습니다. 네, 손을 들어주시면 마이크를 드리겠습니다. 그리고 순차 통역이니까 걱정하시지 말고 한국어로 질문해 주시면 됩니다.
So we both have attendance in person at the conference itself, as you can see on the screen, and also we have online participants. We'll prioritize questions from in-person attendees, and we can start now.
편하게 질문하실 수 있도록 한 말씀만 더 드리자면 위게르프 교수님은 대화적 교육의 전문가시기 때문에 여러분들의 이야기를 듣는 것을 너무 기다리셨고 그리고 그것을 들음으로써 더 많은 것들을 나누실 수 있어서 꼭 여러분들의 참여가 필요합니다.
Just to caveat ahead of the Q&A session, we are aware that you are a professor and a thought leader in dialogic education, and hence we know that you like to talk and engage with the participation of readers and people who are listening to your lectures. So we are looking forward to a diverse engagement across the audience that we have today.
Thank you.
앉아서 해도 될까요?
네.
네. 굉장히 그 많은 것을 배울 수 있는 강의 먼저 감사드립니다. 저도 생각이 정리되지 않은 질문이어서 조금 부족하더라도 양해를 부탁드리겠습니다. 그 AI하고 이제 제가 가장 귀에 꽂힌 것은 이제 예술이 언어를 프리시드 하기도 하고 엑시드 하기도 한다라고 말씀하신 부분에서 굉장히 동의를 하고 그런 예술에 대한 견해를 갖고 계신 거에 대해서 굉장히 감사하게 생각을 했습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 AI는 결국은 거대 언어 모델인데 이 AI가 만들어내는 이미지들이 이미지로 보이지만 결국은 언어라는 구조 안에 들어 있어서 지금 AI랑 이미지 예술이 굉장히 자연스럽게 코워크를 할 수 있을 것으로 이제 많은 그런 실험도 하고 있지만 결국은 굉장히 다른 어떤 AI가 만들어내는 이미지가 언어 안에 있다는 점에서 한계를 갖고 그것이 과연 언어를 넘어서는 어떤 작업이 될 수 있는지 그 질문이 하나가 있고요. 두 번째는 감각하는 것이 결국 세계와 만나는 접촉점으로 말씀을 주시고 그것을 하나의 의미 공간으로 주셨는데 이제 AI하고 인간이 그런 감각적인 접촉이 가능한 건지 그런 여러 가지 생각이 들었습니다. 그래서 AI와 인간의 협업이 너무 그냥 자연스럽고 너무 편안하게 설명되고 있는 것은 아닌가 하는 의문점이 들어서 거기에 대한 추가 설명을 부탁드리겠습니다.
First, thank you for a lecture. There was so much to learn, and I apologize for the lack of brevity because my thoughts weren't as organized when I was asking these questions. First of all, I think about art and I think about AI, and I agree with how art and AI stands at a delicate line, and it crosses and at the same time transcends, yet it doesn't transcend as it precedes language, and the barrier between it's a very intricate, delicate one. but AI is a large language model after all, and it is the image that it generates. I want to pose a question: does it not go under the overarching barrier of language after all? Does it really transcend language? Third of all, in your perception of touch, and when you posit that the sense of touch and our sensuality is our path to connect with the world, is it possible for AI to share that with us, to share that with the human sense of perception? Is it not too natural at the moment in its alignment, in the connection and collaboration that AI has with humans? Is it not too much of an optimistic take? Those are the questions.
Yes, thank you. Merleau-Ponty spoke about the silence that is not the opposite of language. Language for Merleau-Ponty emerged almost spontaneously from the perceptual world. If you imagine like gestures with your hands, you could have silent languages for deaf people coming out of gestures. And sounds that might start as, like, for chimpanzees, you might start with a cry to warn people. These become words. So in other words, language is not the opposite of the world. And the way I understand that, I've also been somewhat influenced by the controversial post-structuralist philosopher Jacques Derrida. I think Merleau-Ponty's concept of the écart that I began with, the difference that is the foundation of meaning, is very similar to the idea of Derrida that language is always constructed out of differences. So everything is a form of writing. You mentioned that AI is based on language. It's a large language model. I believe that it also can include texts and sounds and so on. It reduces everything to tokens, digital representations. And the most significant patterning of meaning that is found is not really about language or art or touch. It's differences. It's patterns of differences, if that makes sense. And if you ultimately ask, well, what is a difference, you know? What is a difference? A difference, I think, is a very profound question, because the difference between perspectives opens up on a potential for all meaning. And if we call that language or dance, I don't know, it's more like the idea of the Tao in the Chinese, or it's a kind of pregnant nothingness, if that makes sense. And so I think that AI potentially points us towards that reality of meaning, if used properly. It doesn't trap people in a pre-existing set of language. But of course, when I say used properly, that's about the pedagogy. And you're right, my vision is probably very optimistic, because of course current AIs are very much influenced and biased and controlled by different groups, and they could be used to limit people as much as to empower them. So my optimism is based on being an educator, and I think as an educator we need to have hope, and we need to be, the idea is that we, through pedagogy, through the way we use AI, it becomes a partner prompting people to reflect and see beyond the cliches and conventions. Oh, just one last thing, you mentioned touch. I was trying to put in a little video there from Ghislaine, which I could do later, where you can have virtual touch, you know, your virtual hands, and you can touch across the world. It's quite interesting. Where's the space of the touch? At the moment, of course, AI is not embodied and it's not touching people really, but of course you can simulate digital touches in virtual reality, which is interesting.
요점 중심으로 영한 통역을 진행을 하겠습니다. 우선은 멜로폰티는 침묵 자체 아니면 고요함, 공허함 자체가 언어의 반대가 아니라는 개념을 먼저 강조를 하고 싶은데, 예를 들어서 수어, 청각장애인을 위한 수어 또는 침팬지의 울음소리, 이런 것은 모두 언어의 반대가 아니라 또 하나의 언어, 또 개념의 차이에서 나오는 또 하나 파생되는 또 하나의 언어의 유형이라고 생각을 합니다. 데리다 작스 데리다로 올라간다면 이 메를로퐁티 그리고 이 에카르라는 개념은 이 언어의 차이점에서 비롯이 된다고 생각을 하는데, 이 언어의 차이점 자체가 결국 저는 출발점이라고 생각을 합니다. AI 자체가 결국에는 엄용 거대 언어 모델이기는 하고 모든 게 토큰화되고 디지털화되어 있긴 하지만, 이것은 언어나 예술이나 감각 이런 것의 영역이 아니라 결국에는 모든 것의 차이점의 패턴 그리고 이런 공허함의 패턴의 개념의 차이에서 오는 추상적인 개념이라는 것을 저는 강조를 하고 싶습니다. 만약에 이 현실의 언어라고 구상을 하고 있는 이 장벽 속에 사람이 결국에는 가둬지게 되고, 이 AI라는 새로운 기술이 도래를 하면서 결국에는 이 장벽에 가둬져서 사람이 편견이나 통제 이런 것에서 벗어나지 못하는 기술의 발전의 리스크 자체는 저도 매우 잘 알고 있지만, 결국에는 저는 교육자로서는 조금 더 낙관적인 태도가 필요하다고 생각을 합니다. 사람들이 결국에는 자신의 성찰을 이끌어내고 그 성찰로서 결국에는 세상을 좀 더 낙관적으로 바라보는 것을 이끌어가는 사람이어야 된다고 생각합니다. 감각 그리고 터치에 관련해서는 지슬레인의 이 소리, 이 영상을 보여드리고 싶었는데, 가상현실에서도 이 감각 그리고 이런 터치에 관한 것을 형상화시키는 게 가능한 걸 본다면 저는 그 부분 자체는 매우 유의할 점이라고 생각을 합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 더 질문 있으신 분 편안하게 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 마이크 가겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 최한울이고요. 발표 잘 들었습니다. 저는 고등학교에서 학생들한테 디지털 드로잉 생태 미술 교육 수업을 한 적이 있고, 학생들에게 AI에 대해서 미술 교육이 나아가야 할 방향에 대해서 질문을 한 적이 있는데, 인상 깊었던 대답이 AI가 굉장히 무섭다라는 대답이 굉장히 인상적이었습니다. 17살 남자 학생의 의견이었는데, 그 학생들은 우리가 생각하기에 가장 미디어에 친숙한 세대임에도 불구하고 거기에 대한 두려움이 있는 것으로 보였습니다. 그래서 교수님께서 말씀하신 그 바깥에 있는 낯선 것을 안으로 들여와서 학생들과의 이런 소통을 할 때 어떤 식으로 학생들의 이런 불안함과 그 AI를 좀 더 지혜롭게 미술 교육에서 사용할 수 있는지 궁금합니다.
So I'm Hanul Choi. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I have experience at a high school trying to implement digital education, and a lot of the questions that I get from the students is related to and rooted in the fear of AI, how scary it is, how fearful we should be. And these students are part of a very tech-savvy generation, a young generation that is grown with the technology that is exponentially grown and advanced. When you're implementing or trying to endorse these external kind of purpose-designed experiments or approaches into the classroom, are there any avenues of caution, or are there any particular nuances that you have been made aware of, or you have made note of, or you could advise to translating such purpose-driven experimental theory into the classroom to educators?
Thank you for the question and the previous question. I guess it's understandable whenever there's a new technology that there are fears and anxieties, and often they are justified, because any new technology can go different ways. Some ways might be negative. I believe there are many concerns about AI. I'm not quite sure why your 17-year-old was frightened of AI in art education. I suppose one concern is the idea that the AI is an artist. I think this has been a major conceptual, I think a mistake or a false route people have gone down from the beginning, when they first named, in the 1950s, I believe, at Dartford in America, they came up with this idea of artificial intelligence, as if we're creating something to compete with human intelligence. And from this image of the AI as something separate from the humans, you might get the idea that it's creating art. Actually, probably it isn't, because it's made of data, of patterns of data. It has no sense of what art is. It has no consciousness. It has no embodied meaning, as humans have. But it shouldn't be thought of that way, as some sort of artificial human. It should be thought of as a collaborator, so that we're developing here basically as a tool, but as a very powerful, innovative tool. And to use any tool well, you don't just dominate the tool, you work with the tool to achieve your ends. So the artist is always going to be, if you like, the human, as was mentioned by the commentator, in terms of post-humanist theory, the human is always more than just the physical. The human extends and includes the tools and technology. And so I feel that the pedagogy is important, the way we teach students, to make them realize that what's important is their sense of care, their concern, their interests, their passions. And following their projects, they can extend their abilities and be empowered through the use of AI. There isn't much reason to fear the AI if you yourself feel empowered as a creator. It becomes a very useful extension and tool. I don't know if that's an answer, but I feel it's about one's attitude or orientation. If you're passive and you allow the AI too much status and authority, you become, in a sense, dominated by it. That's why we need to teach students to be creators. I'm personally not seeing the fear, but maybe I'm not seeing the danger in that, in creating with AI, but perhaps, you can explain more later.
새로운 기술에 그리고 AI, 인공지능에 대한 두려움 자체는 매우 정당화되었고 충분히 이해를 합니다. 하지만 교실에 있는 17살의 학생이 왜 AI를 두려워하는지에 대한 질문은 좀 던지고 싶습니다. 1950년대로 거슬러 올라가면 이 다트머스 대학교에서 인공지능이라는 개념이 도래를 했고, 처음에는 결국에는 인간과의 경쟁 구도인가, 인간과 분리된 개체로 결국 예술을 하는 독립적인 개체가 형성이 되는 건가 라는 질문이 던져지기도 했었지만 아니라고 생각합니다. 결국에 인공지능은 의식 자체가 없고 의미를 내재화하거나 내면화하는 게 불가능합니다. 결론적으로는 인간은 결국 인공지능을 협업자이고 도구로 생각을 하고 인간의 목적을 도와주기 위해서 인간은 결국 이 모든 기술이나 도구나 이 목적의식이나 자기가 가지고 있는 의식 그리고 능력을 모두 포함한 개체이기 때문에 인공지능과 분리된 창조자의 역할을 한다고 저는 생각을 합니다. AI를 대하는 인공지능을 대하는 태도 자체가 수동적이게 가르치거나 이끌어내기보다는 아이들을 창조자의 역할 그리고 창의성의 중요성을 강조하면서 교육을 하는 게 중요하다고 생각을 합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 지금 저희가 여러분들 안에 더 많은 질문과 또 생각이 있으실 텐데 시간이 이제 다 되었고 교수님, 루퍼트 교수님도 영국에서 지금도 그 이후에 일정이 있으셔서 여기에서 마무리하는 것으로 하겠습니다. 그래서 그 앞으로 저희의 그 영역에서 미술교육의 영역에서 계속 저 루퍼트 교수님과도 교류가 있을 것이고 그리고 앞으로 미술교육 쪽에 계속 관심을 가지고 연구를 이어가실 거라고 생각하기 때문에 앞으로도 연결해서 많은 생각들을 나눌 수 있는 기회가 있을 거라고 믿습니다. 네, 그러면 저 토론을 함께 해주신 박효영 교수님께도 깊이 감사드리고 그리고 루퍼트 교수님께도 큰 박수 부탁드립니다. Thank you, Rupert. Thank you.
We are unfortunately out of time, and due to time constraints, we're going to have to end it here. I'm also aware that you have a schedule ahead of you right now, and that you have been quite unwell. We want to thank you, and we appreciate Professor Hugh Park, who participated and presented on the discussion paper that he put forward, and we are sure that we will keep in touch and we will be kept in the loop. Not just within arts education, but just within your field of research in general.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to Professor Park and to everyone involved. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. We'll see you again. Thank you. Okay, we close this room, and please say goodbye to Rupert. Goodbye. Thank you. Take care. Thank you, 태호. Thank you. And 감사합니다. 함께 들어와